up, I can look to you, my listener, and get to where we want to go today. And here is here we didn't get to it yesterday in talking about the Devin Patrick Kelly massacre, the man who wore a police officer uniform, the best of the best in police gear, with his mask and his armor plate and his 30-round clip, right, the banana clip at the bottom of that powerful 223 caliber carbine, like the officers do. Of course, theirs were automatic, and he was just playing terrorist. But the police officers, they enforce the law with weapons that are fully automatic and semi-automatic. And the question that we didn't get to yesterday that I hope we can just think about for a minute today is there an alternative to executive protection? And when I say executive protection, I mean protection by the executive, which has taken over the world. We complain sometimes in talk radio and the mainstream media on the right-wing side or the conservative side about judicial tyranny and how the courts have taken over the government. Well, in a way, all the branches that Montesquieu in his early writings thought would be all in balance, right? That was the ideal of the founders, was to have an expansion of government, the civil government, but to make it palatable, you have a biblical element in it, and that is divided government, the three branches: judicial, legislative, and executive. So, Montesquieu was not trying to restrain government, though he's considered to be a conservative philosopher. He was, in fact, trying to expand it, expand the civil authority and executive government across all of society. That's what the revolutionaries were all about. Even some of those who were thought to be conservative and having a distrust of human nature, right? That's why we have divided government. Here in Chattanooga and in Hamilton County, we have divided government, and in Nashville, there's the three parts of government, right? The three parts of the civil authority, and of course in the federal realm as well. But do we have an overweening judiciary? Well, we have a recalcitrant and disobedient and evasive judiciary for sure here in Hamilton County. And but the main problem is not the judiciary. The main problem is the executive branch and the executive concept. And if you go to Nooganomics.com, you can read Dr. Hamburger's fine analysis of how that has happened. It has happened through administrative law, something I've been giving a lot of thought about in the past few days. I'm reading in Title IV of the Tennessee Code, the UAPA, the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, and all the powers of executive government are under UAPA. And you think, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? Well, it means that executive government operates in the sphere of administration, and it's sub-constitutional, it's para-constitutional. In other words, it runs parallel to constitutional government, and in effect has destroyed constitutional government and the restraint of the state, and allowing the state through executive power to, you might say, to terrorize and strangulate and manage the people. That's what executive government does. And because we've had executive government, probably since the 1880s, with the rise of the progressive reform movement, which destroyed many ancient rights and ancient liberties, or pretended to anyway, with the support of the courts, we have executive government. So because we have executive government, you and I are a passive and defenseless people. Now, what about in Sutherland Springs, Texas? Why was there not a single man in that church that had a 380 in his pocket, or a 22 semi-auto in his jacket? Why was there nobody with a 45 Colt Commander under the left armpit? Right, a right-handed man would have a Colt 45 under his left armpit. Why was there nobody there among? I think standard attendance on the Lord's Day at that church is about 50, 75 members, according to reports. Well, there was a neighbor, Stephen Williford, who is the hero today, and he, an NRA instructor, chased after Devin Patrick Kelly, the man dressed like the cop, right, with all the armor plate, and he didn't have a taser on, and I don't think he had a belt of ammo clips like David Roddy, our chief of police, does. He goes around with the clips sort of cutting the air as he moves forward. 3 clips, probably with 16, if it's 9mm, 16 rounds apiece. So he's got 16 times 3 plus a clip. If he's got 9, another 16, that's 4 times 16. That's more than 50 rounds for a 9mm automatic. So, Chief Roddy is waiting for warfare. He's waiting for the assault to begin, as it were. And it is a very military occupation, policing. But because we have this executive agency in Chattanooga, and you, my listener, if you're from a far place, you have it in your town too. And we have even county governments and their sheriff's departments acting executively and with a great deal of brutality all across the country. There's much bloodshed, particularly it could be as much as half of the people who are victims of the policing profession are folks with mental problems. As we say, I don't really think they're mental problems. I think they're all spiritual and theological problems. But let's just grant for a moment, as the host graciously do, that these are mental problems and that they're psychological, physiological. And of course, many of these people who are mass killers are hopped up on drugs. We'll never find out the names of this medication. You watch how the media will stifle the names of the medications. You won't find out. You won't find out. The drug companies, I would say, have that part of the data flow in MSM stanched, right? That you're not going to find that out. Well, what are the defenses? If we're so defenseless today as Americans, you, my listener, here at 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4 live on Facebook at Nooga Radio. If we're so defenseless, what can we do? How can we understand the larger issue? Since we're a show about ideas, how can we understand the larger issue and the news? Okay, we have Stephen Williford, who waved down a man passing in another car or truck, and they chased after Devin Patrick Kelly and fired several times at him. Devin had took a couple of shots from well-placed fire from a long gun. Of course, a long gun is really what you need in a situation like that for accurate fire. Pistols are notoriously inaccurate. I mean, it's very hard to shoot well with a pistol. We've had seized from us the executive power, and by that I mean we have professionalization of self-defense. We have a professionalization of the idea of lethal force applied in the protection of women and children, right? Those are the parties we care most about. The man who's armed in Chattanooga, the man who's armed in Hamilton County or Bradley County or any other county who obtains the state privilege, if you will. It's kind of these are not strictly privileges. These are the whole idea of licensing the wearing of a weapon is not a strict privilege. In fact, it's an unknown claim. It's not a privilege. Is an occupation done by permission. Okay. Carrying a weapon or driving a car or traveling by car, so-called driving an automobile or motor vehicle, those are kind of hybrid privileges. They're not strictly privileges in our law. They are a police power type privilege. That's really what they are. They are an evidence of the police state. But we have taken from us this self-defense, this executive power. Okay, to carry a weapon is truly executive. And I would say, as the head of a household, you, my listener, should be the executive, right? You should execute things. You should make things happen, right? That's why St. Paul would say you're the head of the household, right? The biblical model of the family is the husband and father is the head, and the wife is the heart, right? Her interest is internal to the home with the children and the home business, the farm, the animals, all the upkeep, and beautifying, making the home welcome for visitors and strangers, relatives, and of course the head. That's her husband. The husband, his view, because he's a man, is about conquest. It's about marketplace. It's about share. It's about creation. It's about building factories, roads, highways, making war, and those are the external interests that men, by God's creation, by God's design, have. Okay, they are external. They're executive. They decide. Men are deciders, and they make things happen. Even though we have many women who are like men, they act like men, and the more power to them. But in our country, we have men who have become neutered. They have become sort of weenie men. We are kind of girly men, to use the phrase from former Governor Schwarzenegger. We are girly men. We are weak. We are limpid. We are limp. We don't have strength. We don't have muscles, and we don't have a means of projecting lead. Okay, men have means of projecting other things, but lead, hot lead, as our news director likes to say when giving the news report about the latest excitement in Chattanooga, hit by hot lead. Well, too few of us have that, and I think too few of us, and we become, like I say, limp and lax and kind of passive. What is the defense of mass shooting? Well, the defense of mass shootings, as I'm going to mention later, think about the Puritans in the 1660s and 1710s and 1730s in our colonies. They were men who had they stacked their rifles. They didn't have rifles. They stacked their arbusks, their blunderbusses, in the middle of the worship hall in their rustic cabins along the East Coast when they came to this country. They were all armed. In fact, there was public supply of powder and bullet, public supply of powder and lead given to the men as part of their duty. Right, you had a duty, and when as we'll mention later, if I can remember to get back to it, you had if you came to church, you had to have at least 6 shots. Okay, and in some areas where the Indian threat was grave, you had to have your light. You had to have your fire going the whole time. In other words, because you might be attacked, your fire with which you lit the powder in the pan had to be lit. Well, the defenses of mass shootings is the armed citizen, plain and simple. That's the answer. But what, in the idea of the armed citizen, everyone plays the role of public defense. Everyone plays a role of defending women and children. Why do you, my listener, want to have an officer in blue led by Mayor Andy Burke's chief of police, David Roddy? Why do you want David Roddy to be the man who represents that function? It's an executive function. Why do you want him to be the only one to do it? Why not you? Why not you? Well, you see, you've delegated this function. It should not be specialized. It should be common. The idea of defense of women and children, defense of the innocent, should be common and democratic. It should not be elitist and non-democratic, okay? Because that's what we have now. We have a non-democratic executive power all across the country operating in administrative law. That's the other thing. It's above the law, constitutionally speaking. These are extra constitutional authorities, as Roger Roots says. Go to Nooganomics.com, by the way, our chief sponsor, and read Roger Roots' essay, Are Cops Constitutional? Are Cops Constitutional? It's at Nooganomics.com. It's a famous essay. You can find it elsewhere, but I reposted it, I think, in 2 or 3 parts to break it down. And that's Roger Roots, Are Cops Constitutional? And they're not. They are above the Constitution, and yet they operate in administrative law. That's as I'm looking at this whole traffic crisis that's building, the Court of Appeals has given a negative ruling in probably the most important case before it in the past 82 years, recently out of Middle Tennessee, a negative ruling on the right of travel and the use of administrative agencies and administrative activity by cops, by Tennessee Highway Patrol people and sheriff's deputies in administrative jurisdiction, pretending that administrative jurisdiction supersedes and rides over and, like a wave, washes over constitutionally protected rights. That's what's happened legally. So you have an overturning of constitutional government and a weakening and, you might say, an enfeebling of your rights. Your rights, you, my listener, rights enfeebled by, well, what we could call the deep state. Okay, that is the deep state. 800-8949, 800-8949. That's 800-8949. So are we going to rely on experts or are we going to rely on ourselves? If we rely on ourselves for the executive power of shooting a bullet, that's an executive decision, right? That's an executive decision because in the end, the bullet, if it hits the target, executes the person, right? The person is dead after you hit him with a bullet. Now, would it have been okay if Stephen Williford had hit a bullet, fired a bullet, and a .223, he was firing a .223 caliber .2, the wounding round, right? The round that tumbles in the body and doesn't kill, it just wounds you. If he had fired a .223 and hit Devin Patrick Kelly in the back of the head and killed him, would that have been, he would have executed him, right? That's an execution. Lawful. It's lawful. It's in self-defense. It is among the rights of the people to stop a malefactor at any cost. In that case, you chase after the man and you shoot him dead. That's what you have to do. You stop him. You try to. In fact, those 2 shots that hit Devin and Patrick Kelly were enough to stop him. He couldn't control the car anymore. He was so badly hurting. He was screaming in agony. He did get a call into his dad though, saying he was probably not going to. He was injured and he was not going to make it. Now, if we have the executive function coming back to us, if we have that coming back into our breasts, you, my listener, and I, your host here, David Tulis, what we can do is we can overturn the abortion ethic. Okay, think about it just for a second. The abortion ethic says your life for mine. Okay, your life for my life, and I suggest that if we take back self-defense of women and children, these of course are born children, right? Right, children who are wearing clothes, children who have their hair combed, children who have breakfast still on the corners of their lips, right? The 4-year-old who still has got big kitties in his eyes and keeps forgetting to wash them out with a wet rag before he comes to breakfast. That one, right? Women and children. If we can defend women and children, we have overturned the abortion ethic, which slays the unborn with the help of state-approved police-protected doctors called abortionists or baby killers. If you want to have the correct nomenclature, that's what it's called, baby killers. And the overturning that ethic, the ethic of me first, and the ethic of delegation to the expert, we have this: my life for yours, not your life for mine, but my life for yours. And Stephen Williford, claiming the executive function for the people, right, and for himself, said, "I'm no hero. I'm not." He says, "I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills I needed to do what needed to be done. I just wish I could have gotten there faster," he says, according to Breitbart. I didn't know what was happening. He says, "I was scared. It was surreal to me. It couldn't be happening," he said. And that is a man who has given much of his life to protect the idea of self-protection, the idea that we are responsible for policing. Policing does not belong to the state. It belongs to the common man, especially if that man is an American, especially if that man has a sense of identification with Chattanooga and Hamilton County. You, my listener, you are the man who matters, right? And that's why you tune into my show, David Tulis. And that's why you will be going to Nooganomics.com this afternoon when you get home and say, I've heard about Nooganomics. I've heard about it. And not tonight, I'm going to subscribe to it. I'm going to subscribe to it because that lets David Tulis know that I care about what he has to say, even if it's not in the 5 minutes I have to give him on the air. David Tulis, who argues that you should love your neighbor and buy local. The argument is so wonderful. It is a very weak argument. Okay, it's a poetic argument. It's not really. It doesn't have a lot of executive 87th Airborne power in it. It really doesn't. And it is near is better than small, small than big, and simple than complex. Right? Three main headings. Always argue in threes. And then in the footnotes, again, sans serif type. And of course, only if you're a real fan of mine do you know why my type is sans serif. Okay, but just ask somebody. Well, wait, it's just you. Oh, sorry, it's just you, my listener. Okay, we can't ask anybody. Well, but get somebody else to listen to the show with you. That will double my listenership, and then he'll have heard my explanation of why, in my analysis of the local economy and free market, there are no serifs on my type. But in sans serif type, probably Helvetica, the neutral type, right? Personal is better than corporate, and physical is better than abstract. I make that case every day in one form or the other at Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics.com. Do subscribe. Carrying a weapon is selfless. Carrying a weapon is trouble. I carried in my briefcase for a decade. I carried a pistol. And then later, when I had a son who David Jonathan Tulis, we have the same name to confuse the enemy, right? He said, "Dad, why don't we take the handgun course at Shooter Supply here in Hickson, and get a permit?" So I said, "Okay, you're probably right. Let's do that together." And he and his girlfriend were in the class together. So I then carried a 45 under my pocket. And it's just trouble, it's heavy, it's trouble, and I thought, well, since I don't want to be in a situation where I'm misunderstood, and we have so many people being killed nowadays, many people with autism being shot dead all across the country, as many as half. Mental problems, physiological problems, weird behaviors, right, as they say, shot dead, tased and shot. There's so much misunderstanding about innocent activity, innocent people, innocent resistance, innocent questions that we've got to make some major remedies. And so I thought, I don't want to be shot by accident by some some kid who's just come back from Afghanistan, and who thinks he's hot. You know what? Okay, I don't want to get shot by him because he sees under my jacket the little butt handle of a Colt Commander 7+1. Carrying a weapon is selfless, and I think if you do that, if you carry a weapon, my listener, in self-defense, but I say it's not self-defense. Okay, let's get that straight. 800-8949, 800-8949. It's not self-defense. It's defense of women and children. You know, I think it's fine to say it's self-defense, but in the end, it's not just you you're defending. Because think of it: if you have a weapon, suddenly you have responsibility. You are the person. You're the only person who can stop what's happening. You're the only person who can jump into that doorway and stop the killer. Only you. If you have a gun, you suddenly have a terrifying responsibility. And that responsibility is exactly what Stephen Williford weighed as he dreaded in a surreal series of events. He waved down that other car, in the street, the man just happening to come by, and said, "He shut up the church. There he is. Let's go after him." And he took on that responsibility. If you have a weapon, you have executive authority. You have suddenly before God a great duty. And I would say there not a man who undertakes that responsibility of protecting the innocent, protecting women and children first, and does not have a connection with the God who made him, right? Who put his eyeballs together in the womb, who knit his nose, and has supplied him that morning with his cornflakes and milk, which he greatly enjoyed with the banana. The delights of eating, the delights of swallowing, the delights of feeling gratified at food, at the farewell kiss from the wife on the way out, all those things that God gives. Be there not a man who does not thank God for those things, because that man now with his rifle is chasing after the Devin Patrick Kellys of the world, dressed as he is, like the officer, the courageous officer, ready for warfare here in Chattanooga. There are going to be cases like this ahead, right? They're going to be ahead. And what if it's you? What if you're the man who's there and you are thinking not about yourself? It's not self-defense here. No, it's defense of women and children and the weak. Now, there are many weak people. They are mentally troubled. They're personally troubled. They're beset by the sin problem. They're beset by all kinds of weird things that come when you don't address the sin problem. That's where mental problems come from the misuse of the warning signs that sin causes, and a rejection of God's remedies for many of these problems. So people who are in that situation, they are vulnerable. They're among the weak, and you, my listener, you are there to defend them and to uphold their lives. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.